Welcome to the Eric Brady podcast, Series 1, Adolf Hitler, His Bombers and Me. Episode 23, Life in Hospital. Eric, you started off on a ward of soldiers. Tell us more about life in hospital.
In that ward as well, I was the only lad, so I think I was made a bit of a fuss of. And then we started getting a squad of other kids coming in. They would come in on Monday morning and then go out on the Wednesday, because at that time there was a fad about children having tonsils out. I don't know why, but that was what was happening. And so week after week, these children, these boys, would come in on the Monday morning, have their operation, recuperate on Tuesday, and go home on Wednesday. But us long-termers looked down on them rather. They were only tonsil boys, and so not really worth considering. And what we did, us few boys that were mobile, would trot around the grounds of Chase Farm Hospital, quietly enjoying ourselves. Having been at Chase Farm Hospital for quite a time, I was suddenly transferred again, and this was to Carshalton Hospital, which was further away still. And there the regime changed totally. At Carshalton Hospital, the sister in charge of the ward was very tolerant of small boys. When I went to Carshalton Hospital, it was a very large children's hospital. The ward that I was sent to was in Street F and number 2. So the ward I was in was F for Freddy 2. And there the regime was totally different. The sister in charge of F2 was a real martinet. I think her name was Sister Margaret. And occasionally she was replaced by a Sister Olive, who was very much nicer, shall we say, more tolerant. And at Carshalton Hospital, I was not one of the few boys in a wounded soldiers ward. I was one boy among many boys. As I recall, the wards in those days in hospitals were very large, something like 30 beds in a ward, 15 each side. In F2, there were some girls as well. Their beds were grouped near the door. A lad named Kevin was top dog. He was a bully. All of us were a bit worried about him, and he would pick on a boy every now and again and make his life rather unpleasant. And because I was the newcomer, once they quizzed me on what had happened to me, which is what happened to all newcomers, Kevin decided that he would have to demonstrate in various ways that he was the top guy in that ward. So he proceeded in different ways to show his authority. At that time, I'd been given 2 model aircraft, and they were my pride and joy. One was a Spitfire, and it was so detailed that in the cockpit, there was a seat, there's a pilot in the seat, and stretching from the tail rudder up to a spike in the cockpit was the radio aerial. The other was a Lightning aircraft, twin fuselage, and I thought those were wonderful. And they were in the pride of place on my locker on the top. And one day, for some reason or other, Kevin decided that he would show how important he was and unimportant I was by picking them up and hurling them down the ward as far as he could throw them. Both aircraft made crash landings and they shattered. So I gathered up my pieces of plane and put them in the drawer. I didn't tell anyone. The sister and none of the nurses made any comment at the sudden disappearance of my pride and joy. And that was it. And then one day in my explorations around the grounds, I came across a tree that exuded resin. And naturally, I touched it to see what it was like and found it was sticky. So I went as fast as I could back to the ward, got pieces of my planes and tried to stick them together, which worked to a degree. And so I carried them back to my locker as war-damaged aircraft and put them back on the train. And again, I don't remember the nurses or anyone making any comment about the changed appearance. And I wouldn't have asked them for any glue to repair them properly. Otherwise, we spent a carefree life playing our version of football in the quad, as all of us were pretty seriously injured. Many of us in the ward were wearing calipers of some kind or another, and so our version of football was not the usual one. And one day, authority decided that we should have lessons, mainly maths and English, particularly maths. And so one day, trestle tables were lined up down the middle of the ward. We were given fold-up chairs to sit on. We protested. After all, surely being in hospital, we were far too ill to possibly have lessons, particularly maths lessons. And so Sister said, well, you run around all the time. So if you're fit enough to do that, you're fit enough to do lessons. We argued, saying that was all treatment. That wasn't us just running around, but it was no good. Authority decreed we had to have lessons, and so lessons we had. Our teacher had her own views of the best way to educate children. And that was that she would stand behind a particular child, and it always seemed to be me, the way I thought of it, and she would stand breathing stertorously and looking at what I was supposed to be doing. But invariably, my brain froze, and I could not do anything. And so her method of education was to hold the back of my flimsy chair and rattle it, shaking me backwards and forward and yelling at me, "You stupid boy, why can't you do this? It's easy." This was particularly irritating her. If she just shown me and the rest of us how to do a particular thing of adding up or taking away division or whatever, or adding measurements. But it wasn't just me. It wasn't sexist either, because she treated the girls just as badly as us boys. I think she just hated kids anyway. I found myself sitting beside Kevin. I was just put there. But we found a benefit. I could not do problems for some reason or another, but I could do measurements. Kevin could do problems, but couldn't do measurements. So when teacher was at the other end of the table giving someone a hard time, we'd swap jobs. He'd sort out my problems, I'd do his measurements, and then we'd quickly pass them back. Then one day, Kevin announced that he was going home. And so he went home, and we all gathered at the ward's doors to wave him off. I suppose his parents thought that he must have been very popular for us to be like that. But actually, we were waving him off because we were simply glad to get rid of him. And the ward afterwards seemed to be a much friendlier and happier place as well.
To buy your copy of Adolf Hitler, His Bombers and Me to read alongside the series, go to ericbradybooks.co.uk. The Eric Brady podcast can be found on YouTube, podcast services, and at ericbrady.blogspot.com.